On today's episode, we have Jennifer Garrett, who is a mental health therapist and clinical supervisor. Jen has spent the last few years exploring the field of social health and is especially interested in the impact that social health has on mental health and creating more meaningful connection in the world. So Jen has her own experiences of growing up in a conservative evangelical home in the South, and with increasing awareness of her queerness, it called her to begin the lifelong journey and work of reckoning with and becoming who she is, something we all would like to do. The most recent discovery she's made about herself is that she's autistic, always has been and always will be. Let's hear from Jen Garrett. Jen Garrett in the house, one of my favorite therapists, one of my new best friends, and just like an all-around amazing, brilliant person. And I truly mean that. We met when we were on a training retreat in Norway, and of all places, which was just the coolest and most beautiful. And we met the first night there. And as soon as we saw each other, we started jumping up and down and hugging each other. Like, I had heard about you, you'd heard about me, we had mutual friends. And it was just like, I felt like I met an old friend instantly. And, those are really sacred moments in our lives and very special people. And it felt to me like a lifer almost instantly, especially after we got to talking more. And we were incidentally at a training on neurodivergence, specifically on ADHD and autism. And it was on that training, and people will, listeners can hear in a previous episode, it was at that same exact training where I began to realize that I'm likely autistic. I did not know that I'm also ADHD until literally just a few weeks ago. So ADHD, which is big A, like ADHD, with a little u after the A. So big A, little u, capital D, capital H, capital D. ADHD is a term for folks who are diagnosed with both ADHD and autism. And so I'm an ADHDer, you're an ADHDer, and it's different when you find out about these diagnoses later in life. Just a completely different way of seeing the world. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. You're brilliant. You're one of the first go-tos that I have in my life, that I pick up the phone and call when I want to process what these experiences are like. And so I'm really excited, Jen, that you have agreed to come sit on this show for the next few minutes and chat about your expertise professionally and also your personal experiences with being autistic as well as an ADHDer. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I first just want to say, I just want to express appreciation for the way that you see brilliance and the way that you sort of help people see their brilliance. The way that people, you see a thing that can then be celebrated. And so thank you for showing me an aspect of me that had been kind of tucked away, like, oh, don't see me. So yeah, thank you for that.
Well, you're going to have me crying right here at the very beginning of the freaking episode, Jen Garrett. Thanks a lot for that. But that's like par for the course. It's what you do. You know what I mean? It seems like I can't get around you without crying for whatever reason. And not everybody has that impact on me. One of the things I'd love just to kind of start out with, Jen, is apart from being an ADHD or apart from being autistic and ADHD, what are your other identities that are pressing and relevant for you right now?
I also identify as queer. I heavily identify with it. Doesn't have like a label necessarily, but like there's a way in which growing up in a very conservative evangelical culture has impacted my expression and my relationship with my identities. So that feels important, just a sort of a nuanced name, I guess. I would say I'm a Southerner. Most of my life has grown up in the South. And so there's certain kind of cultural norms I grew up with that, or just given that I've since then sort of also questioned and reconstructed. So yeah. And I think I also just want to add that, like, I was only diagnosed autistic 7 months ago. I've been suspecting something for probably 5 years, and started self-identifying probably 2 years ago. And then was just on this journey of like, do I need something official? Do I not? Who would that be for to do that? And then, like you, in the autism assessment that I had, at the end of the assessment, the written report, the assessor identified me as an ADHD individual. And I was like, oh, this means you picked up on ADHD things too. I wasn't coming here for that.
Right.
So that's really, really new. And I'm sure I'm still kind of trying to figure out how that shows up in me. So,
yeah. And so would you consider, Jen, all of your different identities, including being a Southerner, including being raised in an evangelical church and culture and family, including being queer, including being a therapist, including all of these different aspects of self, right? What has that journey been like for you in getting your diagnoses?
I'm not sure if it was my curiosity with autism or my curiosity with myself, or maybe just some subconscious knowing or unconscious knowing that was there that had me drawn to begin engaging some courses around autism. But as I would engage these courses and some like podcasts with people who worked with autistic people without intellectual disability alongside it, as I listened and participated in these trainings, I found myself pushing pause and crying a lot. Because I didn't know that was me until I discovered that was me. And I don't even know that I can pinpoint specific things that stood out, but I do specifically remember the experience of pushing pause and laying my whole upper body flat on the bed and putting a pillow under my face and sobbing at seeing myself or hearing about myself in this information that was being given. And realizing that partly the feeling of like, oh, now this makes sense. My whole life experience makes sense finally. And sort of this like, now what?
What we learn a lot about is that grief and relief process.
Mm-hmm.
And, and there's so much that can be said about that. But looking back in our lives, I know one of the things that came up for me is looking back in my life and thinking about how could all of my relationships have been different?
Yeah.
How could my relationship with myself been different? How could I have celebrated myself differently? I didn't see myself fully, but I felt something, all the internalized ableism that can come with it. Those are the things that came up for you.
Yeah, for sure. It was sort of like realizing all the things I had been forcing myself to do that were really hard and really costing me a lot. And, you said like what could have been different. It was more like I was realizing all of the ways that I could have been supporting myself better and all of the ways that I had been forcing myself to do things that are not either natural for me or not good for me.
Yes.
And so there was this almost like saying I'm sorry to myself in the process too, and kind of like a unspoken promise of like, now that I know better, I can do better with my relationship with myself and the people who in my life are willing to hear and listen and perceive or shift their lens of who they thought I was too. and adapt to a new version of me and a new needs that I have, and meet me in that, so that our relationship can also continue and change. But in order to continue, it needed to change.
So what does that look like for you, Jen? I mean, we each have our own journeys in that. What have you found for yourself, and even for a lot of other people, in terms of how the way they perceive and engage in their interpersonal relationships, how that changes after realizing they're autistic?
I mean, one of the things that hit me really hard that I read in the literature was that there's often a disconnect between intellectual ability and adaptive functioning. So how smart I am doesn't equal how well I can meet day-to-day life tasks and challenges.
Oh my word. That's a mic drop right there, y'all. I mean, that is so true, because that disconnect can be really disorienting. It's like, but I feel like I'm capable, because intellectually there's that capability, but sensory wise, no.
Right. Well, and it's realizing all the things that the adaptive function of daily living, things that I really came to terms with that I struggle with doing. You're asking about specifics in relationships. So the place that most easily comes to the surface is my spouse, my relationship with my wife, and the way we do things at home really shifted. Because there was this way in which she would always say, "But you're so smart. How come you can't just remember to empty the cat litter box? Or you're so smart. How come you can't remember this? How can't you remember to, so there was this equation with smartness and ability. And I saw myself as smart. So I was in this, also didn't know what to do with that. But I also realized I've always had struggles making appointments. I've always had struggles opening my mail and it not just piling up. I've realized I've always had trouble driving and knowing where to park, and that being in the way of me getting anywhere. I've always had trouble with meal preparation and being overwhelmed with how to cook things at the same time and clean it up and da. So all of these things that I was just life, just doing normal things in life, especially things that didn't happen in a routine every day, paying bills that were one-time medical bills, I just couldn't remember to do it, And so now we have changed our communication around things. We have made it such that my wife basically makes all my medical appointments for me as an accommodation. We have a rule that she can open up all my mail and trash the things that she thinks are probably not important, and leaves for me things that are personal or that need to be paid by me. So there's a way that going to the grocery store, holy cow, I was always so overwhelmed in the grocery store. It would take me probably 2 or 3 times longer than I imagine the average person being in a grocery store, sort of just getting overwhelmed with now what? We're at aisle? And I was on aisle 2, on aisle 12, on aisle 4, in the produce, just no
back to
system.
aisle 12 again. Oh, wait, there was something on aisle 4, but was it on aisle 4?
Yeah. Right. And so, also my wife goes to the store, or I go with her. This is not a place I go alone anymore. So that's just one example.
As opposed to the minutia that ends up being overactivating to your sensory system and to your nervous system that puts you into shutdown or into meltdown. Can you just explain briefly what autistic shutdown, autistic meltdown is for folks who aren't familiar with those terms?
Yeah. I mean, the onset of all kinds of things, sensory things and details flying that are just too much to cope with. And so a meltdown for me, it looks like crying. It looks like I have an impulse to bang my head, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just big things happening inside my body that feel like big emotional expressions. And right now, the way that usually manifests is just crying, just a lot of crying. And it kind of looks like me laying in the fetal position.
Mhm.
And because crying is a way that I regulate and self-regulate.
A lot of people don't realize that the crying actually activates the part of our system that puts us into a rest and relaxation mode. And so it's when we're overactivated, when we cry, that activates what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the body down and brings the nervous system down closer to baseline so it's not so heightened. And so a lot of times we'll tell somebody, stop crying, but really that's exactly what they need because their nervous system is trying to regulate.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that has shifted in our marriage relationship too, is instead when I'm crying now, instead of my wife saying, what's wrong? Her first response is, are you regulating? Is there anything you need?
So she knows it's sensory and not emotional necessarily.
Not necessarily. She knows that she doesn't know, and that she just is willing to ask me what this behavior is right now.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Just the question alone can be really a celebration, right?
Yeah.
Of that other individual. Like I see that there's something going on with you, that you're having an experience, and I'm acknowledging it in some way with humility.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
For sure. And I would say shut down is more like, for me anyway, it's like close to sort of what we might call dissociation. Like I kind of start to not be able to engage even like my surroundings or myself. And I just kind of imagine I disappear, or I kind of am blank. And I think I get really still, like just really still and really quiet.
Which is a reason why a lot of folks who are working on computers like we are right now and who are autistic might look away from a computer. I know you and I both do that. We might look away from the computer because our thoughts are kind of over here and we're looking more at a blank wall or like our comfortable spot that's not overstimulating, because the screen itself could be really stimulating for us. I know when I'm working with clients, I have to tell them that, like, hey, if you see me looking away, I'm not ignoring you. I'm not, getting ready to swat a fly. It's just that I'm overstimulated, or I can see myself going in that direction. And so I'm looking and processing off to the left. That's where I tend to look, where I'm kind of gathering my thoughts.
Yeah, I love that, like being able to state and know there be like a dropped expectation for eye contact, because I really feel like I can stay more in tune with myself and frankly the other person when I can look away. Or a lot of times people will tell me that they notice I close my eyes a lot, but it's the way that I feel like I can best stay in flow and stay in tune with what's happening inside my body, where I can best get in touch with my emotions, keep my thoughts slower so that I can like be in a pace that's my rhythm or something.
You're going to your own flow, like you're saying, because what a lot of people, I'm curious to hear what you notice as far as misunderstandings about autism. I think, first of all, what it looks like, but one of the experiences of being autistic is not having the filter necessarily to sort out all the different stimuli, particularly if you have ADHD on top of it. And so there's not just stimuli that's in our outer worlds, there's stimuli that's in our interior worlds as well. So when we can shut our eyes or kind of look to one side to shut out some of the exterior, then we can focus more on what's going on in our inner worlds and get our thoughts together, because we all have something called interoception, where it's really just self-awareness of what's happening inside of our bodies, whether it's our thoughts, feelings, heart rate, being hungry. Some of the most basic ones are, being hungry is a very, very common interoception that's, that we all feel at some point. Most of us do. Let me start that part over. Interoception is self-awareness of what's going on within our bodies. And so the most common one that most of us would be aware of is hunger cues. But we can also notice our heart rate or our thoughts or our feelings or things that are going on, in terms of like pain that we might feel physically or emotionally. So those are all called interoception. And so for people who are autistic, our interoceptions can be either really high or really low. And so when it's at that place where it's really high, it's like we're noticing all these things happening in our body all at the same time, as well as all the things that are happening outside of us at the same time. And it can be overstimulating to the senses in a way that's very difficult for neurotypical folks to understand, particularly non-autistic folks to understand.
Yeah, for sure. And, you mentioned heart rate, heartbeat. Like, I didn't even know other people could feel their own heart normally beating.
Oh,
Like, I can feel it when I'm like exercising or when I'm like activated, but just like hanging around, I didn't realize other people could feel or notice their heartbeat or heart rate. And that's actually one of the things that they use to sort of test interoception and the interoception sensitivity is to estimate how many times your heart beats in a minute. Like, because, not like, oh, I just guessed that it's 60. It's like, because people can sort of feel it or be like, oh yeah, there it is, like locate it internally. And like, that is not a thing that I can do.
Yeah. And see, mine's the opposite. And so here's a prime example of two ADHD folks, two autistic folks who have opposite experiences of interoception of the exact same thing. Mine is so heightened. I feel like my heartbeat is so loud inside of me that it overtakes my thoughts sometimes. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like just a normal, like how most people can kind of feel their heartbeat. It's so loud that I oftentimes throughout the day feel some level of panic of like, is something wrong? Is something wrong? And I mean, you'll see me all day long put my fingers on my wrist or up on my neck and checking my pulse. And so sometimes I'll put my watch on just to check my heart rate to make sure I'm okay. And by the way, my heart rate's normally in the 50s. And even when I check it, it'll be like, 58, maybe because I got myself amped up, So it's interesting. It's like I have this idea that it's beating faster than it actually is and harder than it actually is. And it's fine.
Well, that's really interesting you bring that up. And it does bring me back to this awareness that, autism, the experience of our sensory things can be so unique and different. No experience is the same. It just makes me realize like that there's hyperconnectivity of certain parts of the brain and hypoconnectivity, and so for a lot of people, it's that, including myself, it's that it's the hypo, interoception, the like low interoceptive sensitivity that has me not really know when I'm thirsty, not really know when I need to go to the bathroom, not really know when I'm hungry. And so, a lot of us will be all kinds of imbalanced because we haven't even had enough water through the day. That's a key part of emotional regulation is to begin to, like the building block of emotional regulation is to build interoception awareness, because it's like, I don't even know that I'm getting upset until I'm about to lose my mind.
So I actually will, during conflict, for example, feel like, oh, I'm okay. And I'll feel very stable. And it might be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours or the next day later where I'm like, then all of a sudden, all of it comes up and it all processes very quickly. It's almost like a slow burn. And then it's like, boom, 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 like really, really fast in my head and in my spirit. And then all of a sudden, oh, I'm upset. I'm not okay. But I really thought I was. And so for me in my interpersonal relationships, it can create a lot of confusion for the other person. So I've had to learn to say, right now, it feels like I'm okay, but I'm not sure how I'm going to feel in a few hours or tomorrow. I mean, I've had to have like the discipline to say that, especially being femme presenting. We have been socialized to make sure that I'm okay and everybody else is okay. We're all okay. Everybody's okay, right? And so I'll say like, no, I used to say, oh, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. And I almost used to feel like proud of myself. Like I'm so regulated. And later, I was not. It was like a badge of honor. Like, oh, I'm so mature.
Yes.
So,
Oh my
I would,
gosh.
lose my shit the next day, and they'd be like, "What? Who
Yeah.
is this? This is not the same person that I was having this exact same conversation with yesterday."
That's such a valid thing. And I have a similar experience of like sometimes with emotions, but like with thoughts, like the people, I'm on the board of an organization here in Asheville. And I was just in a staff meeting yesterday where, the person leading the meeting was like, Jen, so-and-so, anybody else have anything to say? And I was like, no, I don't think so. And then right before the meeting was coming to a close, like they were like winding things down. I'm like, actually,
raising your hand,
raising the thing that I need to say finally landed. Yeah. So people know that after meetings, like 24 to 48 hours later, like my actual thoughts will come through and like, how would you like to receive those new thoughts I have through email, through audio recording? Like I finally showed up to my part of input to the meeting we just had.
Yeah, because there's just so much processing that's happening. And again, oftentimes what can happen is that people attribute these kind of behaviors, right, or patterns to personality. Like, oh, that's just their personality, or that's just my personality. None. And maybe it is, right? But for autistic folks, it is, it's more typical. It's something that you would see more typically. And again, if you're out there listening to this and this is you, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're autistic. But if you're thinking that you might be, just know that this is one of the markers for it. And you might consider getting an assessment. You might not. I'm curious for you, Jen, what was so important? Because you said that for about 2 years you knew, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was so important to you about getting that official diagnosis?
Maybe the part of me that wanted someone else to really sit with me in that process. That part of me that hadn't really gotten to tell my whole story and the experience all through my life. Because that's the thing. It's not like I became autistic later in life. It was like I always have been.
Right.
So to be in that process of being able to look back all through my life from my formative years and my social relationships through this new lens, which by the way was a 5-hour process with one 10-minute bio break. I think that part of me really, really wanted to be seen, really wanted to be witnessed in the full trajectory of my life and to be able to see my life through this lens and all of the little tidbits, of things that I had been seeing and understanding about myself throughout courses and podcasts and books. It's like, oh my gosh, that's me. To be able to sit down and in one arc, tell the full story sort of in one sitting in a way.
And also for so many of us who go to trainings, who learn, who know, who are even in the field like you and I are. I knew after leaving that training, I was like, I even said it out loud. You were there. I was like, well, I discovered I'm autistic. I didn't need a formal diagnosis. But I also felt, and this might just be part of wanting that stamp to say it was official, like needing that validation from someone else to say, it's not just you. For me, it was like a mirror of someone else saying it back to me that was so validating, someone that I respect, that I know is solid in the field and is great with assessments and it catches all the nuances and it's contextual in the way that they assess, not just like some piece of paper they're giving me and asking me to fill it out and then interpreting it. Like they weren't doing that. Somebody I really respected mirroring back to me felt like a celebration of self for me.
Yeah.
I don't know that I necessarily needed it for like societal standards or, if there is one or whatever that even means. But it was more of like, okay, somebody really sees me and it's not just me.
Yeah.
And as much as we can see ourselves and that self-belonging piece, and even begin to go through that grief and relief process and identifying it, right? That's that embrace piece. And even celebrating ourselves by, self-advocacy, whatever that looks like for each of us in any given moment or in multiple given moments. Having that other person, for me, say, I see you, and I'm seeing the same things that you see. And by the way, here's some more things that I see that help me even see myself even more.
Holy cow. Yeah, that part's crazy. Yeah.
Was so rich for me. It was just like, wow, particularly for autistic folks, because we spend so much of our lives from childhood not feeling any of those things, at least not consistently and not in a way that's dependable.
And as far as advocacy goes, I'll just say that I do believe and know that part of the reason that I got my assessment was also because I wanted to feel a stronger sense of being seen in some of the systems that I'm in. I'll just say family, who it felt like also needed something official to be able to legitimize what I was saying was true and what I needed. And so in some ways, it wasn't like for them, but it was at the end of the day, I knew that it was more likely for me to be seen and get some of my needs met in my family system if it was also official.
Oh, yes, 100%. Same thing here too. My parents would have been like, what? I mean, they were kind of like that anyway, but even though I'm a therapist and seasoned and been doing this and we have a large mental health practice, none of that matters. Like somebody else said, somebody else assessed me and said it. And they were just like, oh, okay. So it was really surprising to them even. And they won't mind that I call it by name, but it's true,
Yeah. Well, my family system are all educators. So they're elementary school educators and in that system. And so their experience of what that looks like is different from maybe what they were seeing in me. And that didn't match up.
Yeah.
So
what misconceptions have you noticed people have about autism?
All of the times from college, even into my own neighborhood, walking down sidewalks and sort of like being in my own world in a way, and people maybe waving or interact, like thinking that we're going to interact or something, and like me not recognizing it. And so for so many years, from people in college to my own neighbors, once they found out I was autistic, they would be like, oh my gosh, I'm so relieved. I thought you were just rude.
Oh my gosh, I've heard that so many times from people.
And so, yeah, it was like realizing how much I was being perceived as rude because I was in my own world, not realizing someone across the street was waving at me. I'm just out there to like take my dog out or something, or like on my way to class and, like thinking about something that's happening in class and just not really seeing what else is happening around me. And so in some ways I'm lost track of the question because immediately that came to mind.
Well, the misconceptions.
Yeah.
The misconceptions that people have, like what people think it looks like, as opposed to like what it actually often does in reality look like. Like I know we all who grew up in the 80s at least, and even in the 90s, might have seen the movie Rain Man. That is not the only way autism looks. Autism looks like as many different people who are autistic. That's all the different ways that it can look.
Yeah.
But there's some common themes. I know that many of my clients are autistic, and one of the things that we all have in common is that we struggled with dating. It's not that we didn't date, but we couldn't read dating cues very easily. All of us who I'm working with right now, the clients that I'm working with, and my friends who are autistic have this in common. That doesn't mean it's true for everybody, but there are some commonalities there. And you said something one time that made me laugh so hard. I belly laughed harder than I had in a really long time. And it was, so what do you think about winking? It's like, oh my gosh. There are three of us, I think, at the table, and we're all ADHDers, and we were crying and laughing so hard because we were like, what the hell
What
does it
that mean?
Why are they doing that?
Like, do they know what they mean? Do people who wink even know what they mean? Like, it feels so elusive to me. I doubt that they even know.
Why are they doing that? Yeah. And the other person at the table with us is ADHD, and he's like, I don't know how to wink. He's like, and he kept trying to wink, like his face wouldn't do it. And I cannot look at it the same way now. I saw someone wink the other day, and I was just like, I said it. I was like, I got to tell you, I don't know what that means. You got to use your words. You have to go back to like toddler days. You have to use your words. I don't know what that means.
As a female AFAB person, is the way some of this presents is like finding myself in roles throughout my life where I'm in a particular role that doesn't require reciprocity. Because that's one of the markers or things that like is a thing that autistic people struggle with, And so I noticed my career before therapist was a teacher. So it's like, oh, well, if I know how I'm supposed to show up and I can keep the focus on you and I'm in this role, then that feels more comfortable to me. Like, you don't have to give me anything back. I'll just like outward focus. And when I learned that was an expression of non-reciprocity, my mind was blown.
Because what would reciprocity mean for an autistic person at times?
It would be creating enough space or to be seen, to also like, and that's the thing is like, I noticed that it was sort of either or. I was always in spaces where I was always like, you, outward focused. But then I would be on one-on-one things and it was all like, me. I was like talking a lot about myself and not creating a lot of space for the other person. So it has been sort of a mindfulness practice of balancing that, recognizing that reciprocity is not natural for me. It is a thing that I have to practice for it to become more natural and to like check in around this like give and take. You see me, I see you. You see me, I see you. Yeah,
more symbiosis there. And then I also wonder, Jen, how that gets impacted by our identities as well. So folks with more marginalized identities, does that become even more difficult, right? And this is rhetorical. But also folks with more privileged identities. When we think about white, straight, cis, het, skinny, for example, men, they're wealthy. I mean, we could go into a number of different privileged identities. How does autism impact someone who has all these privileged identities as well? So it can play out very differently. Because I've seen it with folks who, obviously with more marginalized identities, because Black women are so underdiagnosed as autistic and oftentimes misdiagnosed as being bipolar or having borderline personality disorder because of some of the emotional outbursts that can happen with the overwhelm, with the sensory overwhelm. There's misdiagnosis. And again, we see that so often with Black women. And then I've also seen with white men who are autistic who can almost move through the world with more ease in many ways, and still be struggling, obviously, with being autistic because of all the things that come with that, and not have the awareness, the social awareness of their privileged identities, but not realize that that's not attributable to autism.
Yeah, I think I hear you describing a really nuanced thing where maybe somebody can like double down on the one area in their life where they experience disability or marginalization, and almost make it like an equal experience.
Yes.
There's something there that's like missing, that there's a missing of like the fullness of the experience, that it's not like one to one. It's not
It's not one to one.
yeah, it's not one to one.
My husband is a great example and would not mind at all. He, as a white, straight, cis man, is it a lean body? Doesn't have any economic struggles, nothing like that, and is an ADHDer. And it's his only marginalized identity as an ADHDer. And so we've had conversations where being autistic does mean that he has needs and he gets to have needs, and he gets to ask for support in those ways. And also that does not relegate his privileged identities to the back burner. Those are still things that he has to continue to explore if he wants to move into the space that, on the path that he is on, or we would not be married. And he's phenomenal in that way. And so he's had to say, gosh, this is complicated for me sometimes because I have these needs and I feel guilty at times asking for these needs because of the privileged, identities that I sit in. And so that's been really interesting for him. And then, for me saying, oh, wow, this is now one more additional thing. And I also, as most of us do, have places of privilege. And there are different levels and degrees of that. And so that's been really interesting, learning advocacy for ourselves and for others while also exploring our privilege and recognizing marginalization of others as well.
Right. To maintain openness and awareness and to like be in a humble willingness for a dialectic or something, around being in conversation around our privilege and our marginalization, our ability and our disability, and how those things interplay and how those things impact one another, and how to create space for all of it and center what needs to be centered in the moment, and that nothing is rigid. It's all dynamic.
Autistic as we may be, not everything is that rigid. I think there is that kind of flexibility in the way that we approach things too, which I think is an autistic gift, is what I'll call it.
Yeah. And at the same time, like I think when we're under stress, we're more likely to go into rigidity.
Yeah. That's so true. Because when I'm not, I feel like I'm wide open and have so much fluidity, intellectual fluidity, more than most people. One of the things I think that masks autism quite a bit for a lot of folks, and I know for me, is the giftedness aspect. And I'm not talking about like being in the gifted and talented or intellectually gifted program when you were a kid. Maybe that is a marker for you, but having those additional neural pathways in the brain where there's this extra neural activity, and being able to take on a lot of internal stimuli in terms of wanting a lot of activation. And then the autism can be shut down sometimes. But I know for a lot of folks who get that late diagnosis, they think, but I can handle so much and I'm able to be so efficient with so many things and my brain works so fast. And they're not realizing that there's overlap there with autism, but that there are just so many different moving components. And so for anybody who is thinking that they might be autistic and they're, not a kid, because it's so different when you're a child, but they're not a kid, but somebody who's, in adulthood, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even and more. What guidance do you have for them in terms of making a decision about whether or not to explore diagnosis?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about your like belonging integration model. And if it seems like there would be, if there are things that are resonating in a way that a person is seeing themselves, a way that they are in a at a crossroads with embracing what they're seeing. And then, like what's being celebrated, that like that's a worthwhile endeavor, because it seems like a way to belong more deeply to self, to be in that endeavor.
When we look at it also in terms of the life spaces, we know with autism, it's really about what levels of support do we need. And so do they have those levels of support in place? Is that something that you need mirrored back to you, like what I was saying, right? Or like what you were saying? Is it something within a system where we feel like we need that validation, whether that's within our family systems, like you and I were saying, or whether that's within a workplace, for example, if somebody needs that extra level support. So I really love that answer that you're giving too, about looking at that belonging integration model and looking at the different spaces where we might need additional support. And also, do you need to be seen, embraced, and celebrated within any of those spaces? And maybe that could be a guide. Yeah.
To help guide what's next.
Okay, so I'll ask your last question then.
Yeah.
What does belonging mean to you?
Wow. I think belonging is when I recognize myself when I'm with you. Like recognize like, oh, there I am. Here I am.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like when we first met and started jumping up and down.
Like you said, that
so
experience of being with someone and seeing yourself in some ways more clearly by having been with them.
So what I hear from you is belonging is really a mirror in many ways, whether it's when you're holding up to yourself or maybe somebody is holding up to you.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I recognize myself and I go, that's me.
That might be one of my first personal favorites. I love that. Belonging is recognizing myself. I love you, Jen. I love this conversation. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. It's just been really wonderful and inspiring to sit with someone who is so courageous in their own journeys, who's able to hold up a mirror to themselves and honestly reflect back what you're seeing about yourself whenever I'm around you and what I see you do with other people, and what you've done here today as well. It invites other people to do the same thing. And being able to be around you and have that mirror held up to me is one of the most loving things that I think I've ever seen anyone do. And for that, I genuinely from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And I love you so much.
Yeah, I love you too. Now I might be tearful.
No. Thank you for being here today. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. All of the show notes and links can be found on my website at drmonanour.com. That's drmonanour.com. Throughout most episodes, you'll hear me referring to the belonging model that I developed, which is represented by a belonging life map that helps you explore areas in your life where you feel more connection and areas where you might feel more isolation. And you can get a free copy of your own belonging life map on my website. Again, that's drmonanour.com. If you like the Belonging Reimagined podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review. That can help more folks find us and keep more episodes coming. Until next time, I'm Dr. Mona. You're right where you belong.